Thank you, Radhika, and thank you to the Friends of Socialist China. So much history we're learning collectively. A seismic shift is sending shockwaves through the global economy. The well-established capitalist disorder dominated by US imperialism and in place since World War II is now on shaky ground. And I want to deal with why does US imperialism see China as a threat? There's absolutely no doubt that US strategy is to encircle China with missiles, bases, aircraft carriers, with disruptions and interference in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, with US sanctions so sweeping they attempt to bar every form of technology. US corporate rulers are united, Democrat and Republican. They vote unanimously against China while voting billions of new arms for Taiwan. There's a cultural, academic, and scientific exchanges that are canceled without warning, with the ugliest racial profiling and hate crimes on the rise. At the same time, there's no media coverage of the most threatening military moves in the Pacific. We must remember, under freedom of navigation for 200 years, US and British war vessels dominated China. US Navy had a fleet of gunboats capable of navigating 1,000 miles upstream on China's rivers, enforcing unequal trade. Free trade meant the opium trade. Today, US aircraft carrier battle groups with nuclear power submarines, destroyers, jet aircraft are in the South China Sea and in the Straits of Taiwan. There's almost no coverage of what's taking place. And what was literally the same week as the multi-millionaire Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. In that same week, the US Naval Command RIM Pact, that's RIM of the Pacific Amphibious Assault Training, was carrying out maneuvers in the Pacific involving 170 aircraft, 38 ships, 4 submarines, 25,000 military personnel from all the G7 imperialist countries and some 19 other Asia Pacific countries pulled in for symbolic participation. RIMPAC is the world's largest international maritime exercise, and that was the same week as Pelosi's visit. Hardly mentioned, though, in the US media. The US corporate media warns us that the DPRK, Korea, has ominously fired a missile. And they hardly mention that Korea at that very moment was faced with a decapitation drill by US, South Korea, Japanese, a major military drill. They call it a kill train drill. Korea, yes, fired a missile in self-defense. Now, what is China doing that is so threatening to US imperialism, to US domination? Actually, China's doing a few threatening things. China's refusal to go along with sanctions, especially on Russia, is a game changer globally. Other nations can now stand up because they have an alternative. What a surprise that the entire global South stood up, not just 3 or 4 brave resisting countries. To the shock of US war strategists, no country in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and most of Asia accepted the US, EU, UK sanctions. That's incredible. The BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization confirmed that there are new possibilities. The open defiance of so many countries and major trading blocs is a stunning confirmation of weakening hold of US economic power. China's productive capacity, its economic growth, is a very real threat to the US. Capitalism is all about markets. Capitalism must expand. The US and the Western Bloc are no longer the main producer or the main lender. That's a blow. US global hegemony is threatened. The clash is larger than just gas pipelines. The US economy is focused on military production. It's the largest exporter of weapon systems. But US imperialism is unable to match China's Belt and Road development plans. More than 138 countries have signed on for new ports, railroads, industrial hubs, and low-interest loans. China's Belt and Road development loans are far more attractive than US weapons systems and the harsh austerity plans that are attached to the IMF and World Bank loans. Both the IMF and the World Bank exert enormous leverage through structural adjustment policies. The real goal is to force developing countries to privatize their national assets, but they're forced to cut spending on education and healthcare and food. China's Belt and Road is an enormous threat to this global domination. Developing nations now have options. That's a threat. US finance capitalists are alarmed. Imperialism is threatened that China's huge global infrastructure projects could challenge the US-led global world order, that rules-based order, which means the US makes the rules. The plan projects a network of trade routes, rail lines, ports, highways, pipelines, telecommunication facilities, energy centers, linking countries on 4 continents. It includes financing to promote urban planning, potable water, sanitation, food development. 2/3 of the member countries of the European Union had signed on as formal members of China's Belt and Road development projects. Port cities in Greece and Italy, Portugal, Hungary are being rebuilt. New energy projects are underway. Europe's trade with China and its trade with Russia had exceeded its trade with the United States. That's threatening. US organized and instigated the war in Ukraine as an all-out effort to break this growing economic integration. Now, will sanctions succeed in restoring the position of US imperialism? That's clearly the calculation, the question. The center of the global economy has shifted, and that challenges this US-led world order. It's the end of the American century. In the struggle to maintain its dominant position, US imperialism has only one tool against this rapidly developing, sharply competing economic relations, and that's war, both military war and the economic war of sanctions. China is threatening the US domination also culturally, politically. It's making enormous contributions. China has overtaken the US in life expectancy, as has small Cuba, just 90 miles from the US. That tells us something really fundamental about socialist planning. China leads in climate change and on renewables, from fully electric buses to solar panels to vast reforestation. And most important, historic, it has ended absolute poverty and hunger in China. It's a huge accomplishment. They're engaged in the biggest rollout of healthcare, pensions, and other social programs in history. And again, it's in sharp contrast to the social disasters we're facing in the US today. The stock market crashed in the US all this week, and financial planners can't seem to rein in inflation. There's the largest number of strikes and job actions and union organizing in decades. So we have an emerging situation where socialism is an attractive alternative, even for substantial sections of working people in the imperialist heartlands. With the all-round deepening economic crisis, that's something that the ruling class in the US, in Europe, must seek to derail at all costs, and hence the US drive to war. So finally, I want to add, just as a note, I'm an editor of an anthology that involves the writings of several of today's speakers who are part of this program, called Capitalism on a Ventilator: The Impact of COVID-19 in China and the US. And the book was actually banned and blocked in all kinds of ways in the US, but it was translated and published in China and had an entirely different response. So many reviews, discussions, debates, programs. Why? Because China has every reason to be proud of its efforts to contain COVID and share not only vaccines globally, but the testing, the technology, the patents, the raw materials for making vaccines with developing countries. The US for-profit healthcare system is incapable of matching this. So instead, there's wild myths of China's determined effort to control the disease. We're producing this month a new book from the Sanctions Kill campaign called Sanctions, a Wrecking Ball in a Global Economy. And it's going to deal with this enormous change that's shaking the very ground we walk on. So in closing, I'll say that the US ruling class, the US Congress, US corporate media are at this time unanimously in support of an economic war and even a military confrontation, regardless of how destructive they may be to human life, as long as this could break open new markets and destroy their rivals. That's their calculation. It's frightening. US corporate power sees all other economic development as a threat to its global domination. Its aim is to protect at all costs this irrational capitalist system. The Democrats quickly dropped Build Back Better promises, COVID health packages, student loan cancellation, in order to saturate Ukraine with weapons and fund a reckless naval expansion in the Pacific, pump billions of arms to Taiwan. Working people in both the US and Europe will pay the price. And our movement in the US has a special, indispensable role to play, a special responsibility. Defending China is defending our class internationally. Our responsibility is to stand up to this war and to organize workers here to resist the heavy attacks of a contracting capitalist system that seeks to maximize profit in order to survive. So thank you, and I'm so glad to be part of this discussion.